Good morning. I'm going to keep this one relatively short. I just lost a recording where I went a little bit more in depth. Basically, coming out of week 9, the Japanese internment discussion I thought was fairly interesting. I did think that it was interesting to note how many people were bringing up the idea that the Japanese were targeted because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. I did try to comment on a few and ask why the Japanese were targeted. We were also at war with Germany and Italy. The Germans were using submarines to attack American ships when possible. So the question that I had was, why are the Japanese being targeted for this internment? Now, when you think of World War II, we typically think of concentration camps. Well, we typically think of the death camps of Germany. The Japanese were put into internment camps as well, and they were targeted specifically. I think logically it's safe to say that they were targeted because they were a racial minority. The Germans and the Italians had largely assimilated by the 1940s. We can look back into the 1910s when the Germans were still considered sort of an outlier, an unassimilated group, and we can see that they were targeted during World War I. But by the 40s, that's largely gone. The Japanese are thrown into internment camps, and I think it's interesting, especially in a modern context, to try to remember why particular groups are targeted by government actions. And I think the Japanese, in this case, it's fairly evident when you look at something like the court case Korematsu versus the United States that they were singled out largely because of their ethnicity. I still have a few people that need to get me the January 1941 Moment of Decision paper. Please make sure you get that in. That is an assignment, activity grade. I'm hoping to understand which position you would have taken during that time period, or at least reflecting on it, which position was the proper position. Should we have aided the Allies? Should we have just stayed out of it in what was often called America First, isolationism, which had its own sort of ball of intricacies, or some middle ground. So I'm interested to see what you come up with there. Last week was an exam week, so hopefully you finish that. But this week we have week 10, and the weekly reading this week is chapter 27 in our text. We do have a primary source project. This one could get a bit complicated. I want you to come up with a topic from the early Cold War era. And now these early Cold War projects, the early Cold War era is basically the end of the 1940s, early 1950s. And I want you to look through chapters 27, 28, and 29 if you can't think of a topic. But I want a very specific event or a moment in somebody's life, and I want you to try to find 10 primary sources that deal with that. Now, you got to remember, a primary source is something created during the time period that tells us about that time period. It could be a picture, a photograph, it could be a piece of art, it could be an artifact, like a physical object. It might be a diary entry, a newspaper entry, a magazine article, a speech that somebody gave. But I want you to try to find about 10 of those items about the topic that you're looking at and cite them. I believe it says APA or Chicago here. If you use MLA, I'm not going to go overboard and knock any points off on that, but make sure you have a consistent citation for this project. Please give me a link or an explanation of where you found the source. The Kimball Library has wonderful databases that you'll be able to use. What I want to see is that you can find them from a variety of locations, not just go to one website that says primary sources of World War II and then copy 10 different things. There's places like the Library of Congress, there's different museums you could look at. The Kimball Library databases. Also, you can talk to the reference librarians at the Kimball Library, and they can help you find things on your topic. And then provide a 1 to 2 page summary of whatever the source is. And then be sure to alphabetize the citation. And just here's a little example of how it should look at the end. The discussion this week is about who's responsible for the Cold War. Now, last week I gave you a set of documents, and when I was doing the readings, I didn't see anybody refer to the documents. And that's really what I'm giving them to you for, is in the discussions, open up these documents. And when you discuss who's responsible for the Cold War, I don't want you to just refer to the textbook readings, but I also want you to think about these primary sources. So you can say, I believe that the Americans are responsible for the Cold War because, as it says in document A, blah, 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 and then you're laying out your argument that way. then we can have more of a discussion because we can refer directly back to these documents and try to ask questions about the documents, or you can disagree because you can say, well, that may be true in document A, but from the perspective of document C, I read X, Y, and Z. Okay, so please use the documents that I gave you, and we have the, remember, try to get your initial post in by Wednesday or Thursday so that we can have a couple of days to actually have a conversation about whatever was written in the initial discussion post. And then just be aware that next week is an exam week, so we have a lot of things coming up, and we should be back on a normal pace. So I hope that that's comfortable for everybody now that we're kind of out of that catch-up period from the hurricane time off. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and as always, I will talk to you soon. Thanks.